The universe might be conscious, and the evidence is getting harder to ignore. For thousands of years, humans have looked into the night sky and wondered, are we alone? Not just in the universe, but inside our own minds, because there is a mystery hiding closer than any distant galaxy. A mystery scientists still cannot explain. The mystery of consciousness. Every thought you have, every emotion, every memory, every moment you experience reality comes from something inside your brain. A collection of billions of tiny cells called neurons. But somehow, those physical pieces of matter create something extraordinary, a first-person experience, a feeling of being alive, a sense of I. And this leads to one of the deepest questions humanity has ever asked. Why does consciousness exist at all? For decades, many scientists believed consciousness was simply something that emerged from complex brains, just like wetness emerges when enough water molecules come together. But consciousness is different, because no matter how closely we study the brain, we cannot find the exact moment when electrical signals become an inner experience. We can see the activity, we can measure the chemicals, we can observe the connections. But where does awareness itself come from? And this mystery has caused some scientists and philosophers to consider a possibility that sounds almost impossible. What if consciousness is not something the universe accidentally created? What if consciousness is something fundamental? What if the universe itself is, in some way, aware? The biggest mystery in science. The human brain is one of the most complicated objects we know of in the universe. Around 86 billion neurons communicate through trillions of connections. These networks allow us to recognize faces, solve problems, imagine the future, and experience emotions. But there is a strange problem. Imagine you could map every single neuron inside someone's brain. You knew every electrical signal, every chemical reaction, every connection. Would you know what it feels like to be that person? Would you understand the experience of seeing the color red, the feeling of hearing music, the sensation of falling in love? This is known as the hard problem of consciousness. The challenge is explaining how physical matter creates subjective experience. How does something made of atoms become something that can think? For many scientists, this remains one of the greatest unanswered questions in existence. And when science reaches the edge of what it understands, new possibilities begin to appear. The traditional scientific view, is that consciousness emerges from the brain. The brain creates consciousness, just like a computer creates information. Damage the brain, and consciousness can change. Alter brain chemistry, and experience can change. This tells us there is clearly a deep connection between the brain and consciousness. But some researchers argue this may not tell the whole story. They ask, what if the brain does not create consciousness? What if the brain is more like a receiver, like a radio? A radio does not create music. It receives and translates a signal. If the radio breaks, the music disappears, but the signal still exists. Could the brain work in a similar way? Could consciousness exist beyond the brain? This idea is controversial, and there is currently no scientific proof that it is true, but it has fascinated thinkers for centuries. The idea of panpsychism. One of the strangest possibilities is called panpsychism. The idea behind panpsychism is that consciousness may be a fundamental feature of reality, not that rocks think. Not that atoms have thoughts like humans, but that the building blocks of the universe may contain some extremely basic form of experience. Think about how physics describes reality. Everything around us is made from the same fundamental ingredients: stars, planets, trees, animals, humans. All of it is built from particles that follow the same laws. So some philosophers ask, if consciousness can somehow emerge from matter, why? Why does matter suddenly become aware when arranged in a particular way? Perhaps they suggest consciousness was not created by complex brains. Perhaps brains simply organize something that already exists at a deeper level. Integrated information theory. One scientific attempt to explain consciousness is called integrated information theory. Developed by researchers including Giulio Tononi, this theory suggests consciousness is related to the amount of integrated information within a system. In simple terms, a system becomes conscious when information is not just processed, but combined together in a unified way. According to this idea, consciousness is not simply about intelligence. A computer might process enormous amounts of information, but consciousness may depend on how that information is connected and experienced as a whole. Some interpretations of this theory have led people to wonder, could consciousness exist in forms far beyond humans? Could other systems in nature have some level of awareness? These ideas remain highly debated, but they reveal something fascinating. Scientists are still trying to understand what consciousness actually is. The universe as information. Another clue comes from modern physics. Over the last century, scientists have discovered that reality is far stranger than it appears. At the smallest scales, particles behave in ways that challenge our everyday understanding. Quantum physics reveals a world where particles can exist in multiple possible states, where observation plays a mysterious role, and where reality behaves very differently from the solid world we experience. Some thinkers have wondered whether information itself may be one of the deepest foundations of reality. Perhaps the universe is not simply made of matter. Perhaps information is more fundamental. And if consciousness is connected to information, could consciousness be woven into the structure of reality itself? Again, this does not prove the universe is conscious, but it raises a fascinating question. Are we discovering that reality is much more connected and mysterious than we ever imagined? Scientists questioning our view of reality. Several scientists and philosophers have explored ideas that challenge our normal understanding of consciousness. Researchers such as Christoph Koch have studied the relationship between the brain and conscious experience. Philosopher Bernardo Kastrup has argued for forms of idealism, suggesting consciousness may be more fundamental than matter. Donald Hoffman has proposed that our perception of reality may not show us the universe exactly as it is. Instead, our brains may create a simplified version that helps us survive. Imagine looking at a computer screen. You see icons, folders, and images. But underneath those symbols is a much deeper system of code. Could our everyday reality be like the interface? A useful representation, hiding a much stranger underlying reality? These ideas are not accepted facts. They are possibilities being explored. But they all point toward the same conclusion. We may understand far less about reality than we once believed. What if the universe is conscious? Now imagine for a moment that consciousness is not an accident. Imagine that the universe is not just a collection of empty objects moving through space. Imagine that consciousness is somehow part of the fabric of existence itself. What would that mean? Perhaps life would no longer be seen as something separate from the universe. Instead, life would be the universe becoming aware of itself. Every human thought, every animal experience, every moment of awareness could be another way the cosmos experiences its own existence. This idea appears in many philosophical traditions throughout history. But today, some scientists are exploring similar questions using modern physics and neuroscience, not because they have found the final answer, but because the mystery itself refuses to disappear. The question of artificial intelligence. This question becomes even more fascinating as humanity creates increasingly advanced artificial intelligence. If consciousness is simply complex information processing, could machines eventually become conscious? Could a computer someday experience the world? Or is there something about biological life that cannot be replicated? The answer may depend on what consciousness truly is. If consciousness is a fundamental property of reality, then perhaps it could appear in many different forms. But if consciousness requires something unique about living brains, then artificial consciousness may remain impossible. Either way, understanding consciousness may become one of the most important scientific challenges of the future. The biggest possibility, perhaps the strangest possibility, is not that the universe is conscious. Perhaps the strangest possibility is that consciousness has been here all along, and we are only now beginning to notice. For most of human history, we believed we were separate observers looking at an outside universe. But modern science has revealed something unexpected. We are not separate from the cosmos. The atoms in our bodies were created inside ancient stars. The elements that make up our minds were forged billions of years ago. The universe created the conditions for life, and eventually created beings capable of looking back and asking questions about its own existence. In a very real sense, the universe has become aware of itself through us. Final thought. So, is the universe conscious? Right now, science does not have the answer. There is no confirmed evidence proving that the cosmos has thoughts or awareness like a human being.